Imagine this. You wake up in a world that praises kindness, rewards virtue, and celebrates compassion, at least on the surface. People smile at you for holding the door. Your honesty is applauded. You give without expecting, forgive without resentment, and speak the truth even when it stings. The love you gave unconditionally is taken for granted and discarded. And yet, something gnaws at you. Those who rose above you, the ones with wealth, power, influence, security, weren't always the most intelligent or the most capable. They were strategic. They knew when to bite their tongue and when to strike. They understood the currency of perception, manipulation, timing. They knew that being good was never the same as being powerful. Because while the world claps for your goodness, it quietly walks past you. The promotion goes to someone else. The spotlight finds the louder voice. You were good, and yet you were devoured. You begin to notice something. And here's the unsettling truth. The world doesn't reward virtue. It rewards effectiveness. And goodness, if unguarded, is a liability. That integrity, if naive, can cost us everything. But why does this feel so wrong to admit? Why do we instinctively resist the idea that goodness could lead to ruin? Because from the very beginning, you've been told the opposite. But because he was observant, he watched as those who clung to virtue were betrayed, overthrown, humiliated. He saw the innocent slaughtered while the cunning ruled. He saw the price of purity in a world built on masks and teeth. You were taught that good things happen to good people, that the truth sets you free, that kindness is strength, that love wins in the end. He'd ask, why are you trying to be good in the first place? For approval? For love? For safety? Or because you've been conditioned to fear what might happen if you ever stopped? But Machiavelli, writing centuries ago in a turbulent and treacherous Italy, whispered a different truth. If you're only good, you will be broken. It is necessary for a prince to learn how not to be good. Morality without power is martyrdom. And blind goodness is not a shield, as an invitation for the world to feast on your innocence. Not because he was cruel. The friend who charms everyone, but secretly thrives on manipulation. The partner who weaponizes your kindness against you. The politician who says what the crowd wants to hear, then does the opposite. And you've seen it too, haven't you? Because it felt like the right thing to do, and then suffered quietly as others took advantage. The coworker who lies skillfully and climbs the ladder. Meanwhile, you, honest, open, giving, are left wondering why your decency doesn't protect you. He believed in clarity. He believed that to survive in a corrupt world, you must learn how to be both good and ruthless, how to wear masks and wield weapons, not to harm the innocent, but to defend what is yours. What if the very definition of goodness you've inherited is part of the trap? You begin to ask the question that burns beneath the surface of every disappointment. Is goodness enough in a world that doesn't care? Machiavelli wouldn't just say no. Here's the paradox he presents. If you're always good, you will be controlled. Because to Machiavelli, virtue without strategy is vulnerability. You will all keep offering your light to a world that feeds on it without ever giving anything back. But before you recoil in moral horror, ask yourself, have you ever bitten your tongue to avoid upsetting someone who didn't deserve your silence? Who benefits from it? What deeper forces are shaping your sense of right and wrong, and why are they so invested in keeping you tame? Have you ever watched someone cheat or manipulate their way forward and win? Have you ever sacrificed your needs, your voice, your truth? Maybe you've been told that this is the cost of being a good person. But what if that's a lie? Machiavelli didn't believe in cruelty for its own sake. But if you've spent your life being taught to be only good, who taught you to defend yourself? Who taught you how to see manipulation when it's cloaked in kindness? Who taught you when to stop giving, when to walk away, when to strike? Who taught you to be dangerous? Because if no one did, then you've been prepared for a world that doesn't exist. You've been trained to swim while the world is drowning in sharks. And Machiavelli would say, it's not too late, but first, you must see the truth for what it is. Now the real question begins to emerge. What if your goodness is the very thing that's holding you back? What if it's the leash around your neck, disguised as a medal on your chest? What if everything you were taught about morality was designed not to liberate you, but to tame you? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't easy. But you must go deeper, because until you understand the hidden machinery behind this moral trap, so now we must ask, where did this moral programming come from? To answer that, we must look beyond Machiavelli into the minds of Jung, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and beyond. You've seen the consequences, but now you must see the source. Let's go there. You were not born good. You were born raw, hungry, screaming. Goodness was not something you chose. It was something you were trained into, conditioned into, sometimes coerced into. Instinctual, a creature of emotion and chaos and wild desire. You learned to be good. It was taught to you in subtle corrections, punishments, praises, bedtime stories, and the narrowed eyes of adults when you strayed too far from the line. And in their place, you cultivated obedience, politeness, humility, goodness. And this is where the hidden problem begins. Carl Jung called it the formation of the persona, a mask you wear to adapt to the social world. It begins as protection, but eventually becomes a prison. You show only what is acceptable. The more disconnected you become from your authentic self, and while your outer mask may be socially rewarded, your inner world starts to rot. You become brittle, confused, anxious. Understood what Jung saw from a psychological perspective, that morality can be a weapon used against the unaware. You say yes when you mean no. You tolerate what makes you sick. You give and give, hoping it will earn you love. You hide the rest. You forget that behind that smile is a shadow, the parts of you that don't fit the mold. In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche describes how those without power redefined virtue as meekness, humility, and obedience. Not because these traits were noble, but because they were safe. They protected the powerless from the dangerous brilliance of those with the courage to challenge, to rebel, to dominate. You were taught that anger is bad, that selfishness is shameful, that ambition is arrogance, that questioning authority is dangerous. So you buried them. For him, the human being is driven not by reason, but by a blind, insatiable force, the will to live in endless grasping for more. This will is selfish, ravenous, primal. And goodness becomes a kind of illusion layered over this fundamental truth to mask its horror. But Jung warns us, the brighter the light of the persona, the darker the shadow, to be selfless, to be humble. But your core desires remain unchanged, twisting beneath the surface, growing resentful, erupting in quiet moments of rage, envy, despair. The more you strive to be good by external standards, the shadow, the truth of your instinct, you begin to self-destruct. But Machiavelli, staring into the raw realities of politics and human behavior, men are so simple and so obedient to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived, the prince. And obedience in the wrong context is not virtue, it is submission. You follow rules that don't serve you. You tolerate relationships that deplete you. You stay in jobs that shrink your soul. You apologize for existing too loudly. Let that settle in. Goodness without awareness is obedience. Chronic people-pleasing, addictions, but a stranger to yourself. Burnout. A life that feels increasingly hollow, even though you've done everything right. Nietzsche sharpened the blade even further. He saw goodness as a tool of slave morality, a system developed by the weak to suppress the strong. In this way, morality became a psychological cage, not a path to freedom, but a method of taming the human spirit. Think about that. What if the moral system you've been taught wasn't designed to make you better, but to make you manageable? Now enter Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of will and suffering. So you're told to be kind. This is the great split. The mask of morality versus the shadow of the self. The polite, well-adjusted, good person versus the inner world that longs to scream, fight, seduce, dominate, create, and destroy. And here's where the psychological trap tightens. When you suppress these drives for too long, when you abandon the will, anxiety, depression, you've become a good person in the eyes of society. And this disconnection is where the ruin begins. Because when you're disconnected from your power, from your truth, from your capacity for controlled aggression and radical honesty, you become easy to control. You confuse martyrdom with love. You confuse silence with wisdom. You confuse suffering with virtue. And the world, ruthless, indifferent, hungry, sees this and takes what it wants from you. This is not a flaw in you. This is a flaw in the moral mythology you were raised in. Because here's the unspoken truth. Morality has always been political. The church, the state, the family, the tribe, they all created definitions of goodness that served their interests, not yours. It has always been shaped by those in power to serve a narrative that keeps them in power. He realized that power is not distributed based on goodness. It is claimed by those who understand the game. Be quiet, be nice, be modest, obey. The message is clear. Don't threaten the system. But Machiavelli saw through it. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. It wasn't a cynical observation. It was a wake-up call. Machiavelli didn't tell you to be evil. He told you to be awake. To see that being good in a corrupt system doesn't make you righteous. It makes you vulnerable. And if you don't learn to harness it, someone else will use it against you. You cannot live truthfully by wearing someone else's mask. To understand that power, like fire, is neither good nor bad. It is neutral. It is primal. So here you are, perhaps for the first time, questioning the very foundation of your moral identity. Not to abandon it, but to examine it. To ask, whose idea of good have I been living by? And what has it cost me? Because the truth is, you cannot become whole by amputating your instincts. You cannot become free by chaining your desires. And you cannot protect what you love by being tame in a world that respects teeth. This is the hidden problem. You've been trained to be good before you were taught to be wise. But what if you reversed it? What if you learned to see clearly first, to think independently, to understand power, to recognize masks, and then chose your own morality? A morality rooted not in obedience, but in truth. This is the path forward. But before we take that step, there's something darker we must face. Because this trap doesn't just steal your freedom. It rewires how you see yourself and how the world sees you. So now we must explore. What happens when this distorted morality infiltrates your mind, your choices, your relationships, without you even knowing? What are the consequences you've been living with all along? Mistaking them for normal? The answer will shake everything. Let's go there next. You can't see the bars from inside the cage, especially when the cage is made of compliments. When you're praised for being easygoing, generous, nice. When people say, "You're so thoughtful," as they take a little more from you. When you're called the strong one because you never ask for help. When they say you're too good for this world, without realizing that the world is chewing you up and smiling while it does. They're in your body, your relationships, your career, your self-worth. But here's the cruel truth. The world doesn't just exploit goodness, it builds systems around it. The harder it becomes to differentiate between genuine virtue and socially enforced self-denial. You don't know if you're helping someone because it's the right thing to do, or because you're afraid of being seen as selfish. You don't know if you're staying in the relationship because you love them or because you don't to hurt them. You don't know if you're working hard because you passionate or because you believe suffering earns worth. You become addicted to approval, and like all addictions, it eventually begins to destroy you. And the consequences aren't abstract. Let's begin where the damage is most hidden: your identity. Every time you silence your instincts to be polite, your unconscious learns one thing: my truth is dangerous. Over time, this creates self-alienation, a disconnect between who you are and who you're allowed to be. You begin living as a role, not a person. You start performing morality instead of embodying authenticity. And the deeper you internalize this is not goodness. This is moral confusion. Now add another layer: the neurological trap. Studies in neuroscience have shown that the human brain is wired for social survival. The limbic system, the seat of fear and emotional memory, rewards conformity. When you receive social approval, dopamine flows. When you feel rejection or criticism, cortisol spikes. So when you're praised for being good, even if that goodness costs you your boundaries, time, or truth, your brain links self-worth with submission. You start tolerating what should be intolerable. You ignore the inner voice that says, "This isn't right." That to say no is to be selfish. That to fight back is to be cruel. You give until you collapse. You mistake chronic self-sacrifice for love. He spoke of the herd morality, a system where the masses cling to moral values, not because they are true, but because they are safe. This kind of morality doesn't produce greatness. It produces mediocrity. It doesn't challenge tyranny. It enables it. Because the chemical payoff of being seen as good keeps you in the loop. Now zoom out. Look at modern culture. He knew this centuries earlier. He saw how those in power maintained control, not through truth, but through illusion. By convincing people that morality and obedience are the same thing, they built empires on the backs of the virtuous. It doesn't just celebrate this pattern, it exploits it. Workplaces want the agreeable employee who won't question toxic leadership. Partners seek the endlessly forgiving lover who will carry the emotional weight of the relationship. Religions reward the faithful who never challenge the doctrine. Governments praise citizens who obey even when obedience leads to injustice. This is systemic moral manipulation, the transformation of goodness into currency. You've been trained to believe that your value lies in your compliance. That to be virtuous is to be useful. And this moral script has consequences far beyond individual pain. Entire societies decay when their people lose the ability to think beyond obedience. Nietzsche saw this coming. And Machiavelli? He who seeks to deceive will always find someone willing to be deceived. And that someone is often the one who thinks being good will protect them. But it doesn't end there. There's another consequence, a subtler one, perhaps the most tragic of all, the loss of trust in yourself. Because when you've spent years overriding your instincts to fit someone else's moral narrative, you stop knowing what you truly believe. You stop trusting your anger, your jealousy, your hunger, your ambition. You start questioning your own perceptions. You feel something is wrong in a conversation, but you don't say anything because being confrontational isn't nice. You feel manipulated in a relationship, but you blame yourself for being too sensitive. You feel exhausted from always giving, but you feel guilty when you rest. Asserting needs, or even recognizing when you're being mistreated. You begin to believe that the pain you feel is just part of being a good person. This erosion of self-trust leads to learned helplessness. You no longer feel capable of drawing boundaries, and that's exactly how systems of control survive. Because when you doubt yourself, you're easy to lead, easy to sell to, easy to guilt, easy to silence. You become a perfect subject. And so the ruin continues not with a loud collapse, but with a slow disappearance of the self. Until one day, you look in the mirror and wonder, when did I become so small? When did I stop saying what I mean? It doesn't just steal your strength, it convinces you that weakness is noble. It doesn't just wound you, it teaches you to wear the scar as a badge of virtue. When did I decide that being loved was more important than being whole? Your judgment, your capacity to say no, your ability to walk away, your power to protect yourself, even if it makes others uncomfortable. That's the cost of this distorted goodness. It doesn't just take your voice, it makes you grateful for its absence. But what if that badge is actually a brand, a mark of ownership, of indoctrination, of spiritual surrender, not to dominate, but to never be dominated again, still resisting? Here's the wake-up call Machiavelli offers. You cannot be truly good until you are truly free, and you cannot be free until you reclaim what they told you to kill, your instinct. So the question becomes, what would it take to stop being the person the world wants you to be? What would it take to become dangerous again, not to harm, but to protect? The consequences are real, and they are devastating. But if you've read this far, it means something in you is still alive. That part of you, the raw, untamed, questioning soul, they never fully tamed it. And now it's stirring. The cage is cracking. But how do you break out? How do you unlearn obedience and reclaim your agency without becoming bitter, hollow, or cruel? How do you evolve beyond this trap and emerge whole? For that, we must enter the rebellion. Rebellion doesn't always start with fire. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a private thought you're not supposed to have, a question you were told never to ask. What if I stopped apologizing for being myself? That thought, that quiet, defiant flicker, is the beginning of everything. It is about tearing down the internal architecture of obedience that has been quietly governing your every move. Because rebellion isn't just about overthrowing external systems. This is where Machiavelli becomes not a cynic, but a liberator. People often misunderstand the prince. Build it so you can endure, even when it doesn't. They read it as a cold manual for manipulation. But that's a shallow reading. Beneath the surface, Machiavelli isn't teaching cruelty, he's teaching sovereignty. A wise man should act in such a way that when fortune changes, he is prepared to resist her. In other words, don't build your life on the assumption that the world will treat you kindly. This is the rebellion, the end of moral naivety. To begin, you must reclaim your moral agency. That means questioning everything you were taught about what it means to be good. Ask yourself, who defined goodness for me? He called for the creation of a new morality, one born from the will to power, the creative force that breaks old values and births new ones. Who benefits when I silence myself in its name? What would morality look like if I defined it from truth, not fear? Friedrich Nietzsche urged this very revolt. This is what I believe, even if the world disagrees, even if it makes you dangerous. He warned that the more you repress your dark side, the more it controls you unconsciously. The goal, he said, is not to eliminate your aggression, your ego, your desires, but to bring them into consciousness, to own them, to wield them with responsibility, not denial. To Nietzsche, the highest good wasn't obedience. It was the courage to create your own values to say, and is in addition fooled by all the illusions that rise up from his unconscious. And this is the first step to breaking free. Become dangerous. Not violent. It means self-respect that doesn't beg for validation. It means telling the truth when it's easier to stay silent. It means choosing solitude over submission, not cruel. Dangerous in the way a lion is dangerous, not because it attacks, but because no one would dare provoke it. Without self-respect, it ceases to be noble. It becomes self-erasure. Dangerous means boundaries. It is a conscious gift, one that you control, one that must be protected. Carl Jung echoed this in his concept of integrating the shadow. He didn't say, never be good. He said, learn when to be good and when not to be. The man who is not conscious of himself acts in a blind, instinctual way. So what does that look like, practically? It means unlearning the scripts, saying no without guilt, walking away without offering proof that you're allowed to, being assertive without apologizing for your tone, trusting your instincts, even when they contradict social rules. Most people would rather conform than face the abyss of radical choice. But solitude trains you for this abyss. It teaches you how to think without needing consensus, how to stand without a tribe, how to choose without permission, accepting that not everyone deserves your kindness. It means realizing that kindness is not a moral obligation, because when you give kindness indiscriminately, without discernment, and now the second step, learn the art of strategic morality. This is where Machiavelli's brilliance shines. A prince must learn to be able not to be good, and to use this according to necessity. You don't abandon your values. You become flexible. You adapt. You speak, because silence would be a betrayal of the truth. In a world full of liars, total honesty can be suicide. In a society that exploits empathy, blind compassion becomes a weapon used against you. Machiavellian morality is situational intelligence. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming wise. When you begin this rebellion, some will turn on you. They will call you selfish, cold, arrogant, ungrateful, toxic. It's about recognizing that playing by the rules only works when everyone else does too. And when they don't, you stop playing their game. You write your own. The third step is more subtle, but perhaps the most powerful. Embrace solitude, not isolation, solitude. Because only in solitude can you hear your own thoughts, unclouded by collective morality. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, taught that freedom is terrifying. This is the crucible of self-sovereignty. Because once you no longer need to be seen as good, you become something far more dangerous. You become real. Realness can't be manipulated. Realness doesn't need applause. Realness doesn't trade truth for approval. Now imagine yourself here, on the other side of moral obedience. You don't give out of guilt. You give out of abundance. You don't speak because you're told to. You don't ask, is this allowed? You ask, is this mine? This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is not chaos. It is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity is terrifying to those who benefit from your confusion. So be prepared. Why? Because your clarity exposes their compromise. Your boundaries reveal their entitlement. Your sovereignty disrupts the game they've been winning by keeping you small. Let them, because the goal is not to be loved by everyone. You don't abandon your values. You become flexible. You adapt. In a world full of liars, total honesty can be suicide. In a society that exploits empathy, blind compassion becomes a weapon used against you. Machiavellian morality is situational intelligence. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming wise. It's about recognizing that playing by the rules only works when everyone else does too. And when they don't, you stop playing their game. You write your own. The third step is more subtle, but perhaps the most powerful. Embrace solitude, not isolation, solitude. Because only in solitude can you hear your own thoughts unclouded by collective morality. Most people would rather conform than face the abyss of radical choice. But solitude trains you for this abyss. It teaches you how to think without needing consensus, how to stand without a tribe, how to choose without permission. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, taught that freedom is terrifying. This is the crucible of self-sovereignty. Because once you no longer need to be seen as good, you become something far more dangerous. You become real. Realness can't be manipulated. Realness doesn't need applause. Realness doesn't trade truth for approval. Now imagine yourself here on the other side of moral obedience. You don't give out of guilt. You give out of abundance. You speak because silence would be a betrayal of the truth. You don't speak because you're told to. You don't ask, "Is this allowed?" You ask, "Is this mine?" This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is not chaos. It is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity is terrifying to those who benefit from your confusion. So be prepared. When you begin this rebellion, some will turn on you. They will call you selfish, cold, arrogant, ungrateful, toxic. Why? Because your clarity exposes their compromise. Your boundaries reveal their entitlement. Your sovereignty disrupts the game they've been winning by keeping you small. Let them. Because the goal is not to be loved by everyone. The goal is to live a life you can stand behind, without flinching, without begging, without regret. This is the new morality, not born of obedience, but of integrity. Not dictated by the masses, but forged in the fire of self-awareness. And here's the final secret Machiavelli knew, the one few dare to accept. Those who rise are not those who are most virtuous. They are those who are most awake. You've spent long enough asleep. Now it's time to rise. But this awakening, this rebellion, leads to one last door. One final truth. You've broken the illusion. Now you must confront what lies beneath it. Because underneath all the masks, systems, fears, and scripts lies the most powerful realization of all. Let's walk through that door together. What if it was never about being good? What if the entire framework, good and evil, right and wrong, noble and selfish, was a myth built on fear, designed not to guide you, but to control you? Stand still for a moment. Listen carefully. There's a voice, buried under the noise of society, family, culture, one that you've ignored for years. It doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It doesn't even shout. It just waits. The voice of your unaltered self. The self that existed before you were told how to behave. Before you were taught what to believe. Not the shadow. Not the wounded child. Before you became the good person they all applauded. The one who does not perform, does not kneel, and does not ask for permission to exist. This is not the ego. This is the core of you, the one Machiavelli would call the sovereign self. This self doesn't care if you're good. It wants you to be whole. And to be whole, you must embrace the truth no one told you. Being good will ruin you if it means betraying yourself. Because every time you perform goodness to avoid judgment, you fracture. Every time you deny your instincts to please others, you fragment. Every time you stay silent to keep the peace, you disappear. And this vanishing act is the slowest form of death. He never asked you to abandon empathy. What he did was whisper the truth that most can't bear to hear. Survival. The ability to remain whole in a world of masks and betrayal. Machiavelli never asked you to become a villain. The ends justify the means. Discernment. The willingness to make uncomfortable choices when naive goodness would get you killed. At first, this feels like a license for cruelty. But look deeper. And performative ethics, can you build a morality that is real yours, not theirs? You're no longer helping to feel worthy. You're no longer silent because you're scared. Freely. From a place of power, not fear. The ends he speaks of are stability, sovereignty, and the means are not cruelty for cruelty's sake. They are strategy. What Machiavelli teaches is this. True morality begins only after illusion ends. Only once you've peeled off the layers of borrowed virtue, socialized guilt, and here's the final paradox. The more you abandon the need to be good, the more capable you become of authentic goodness. Because it's no longer transactional, no longer a mask. You're no longer giving to be accepted. You are choosing. And that choice, that autonomy, is the highest form of virtue. This is the truth that rewires everything. Goodness is not weakness, but it must be chosen from strength. Otherwise, it's not goodness at all, it's obedience. And obedience, in a broken system, only feeds the machine. You don't owe the world your submission. You don't owe society your self-abandonment. You don't owe the past your silence. What you owe is your truth. That's it. And here's where we transcend even Machiavelli, where we move beyond political strategy into existential clarity. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that existence precedes essence. You are not born with a fixed identity. You become who you are by the choices you make. But choices made under fear are not choices at all. The only real choice is made when you have the courage to be free. Free. In freedom, real freedom is terrifying. It means giving up your need to be liked, your desire to be seen as noble, your craving for approval from a world that does not know you. It means facing the void of responsibility and still choosing to stand tall. It means saying, I will be kind, not because I must, but because I can. I will be just, not because I fear judgment, but because I refuse to be blind. I will be powerful, not to control others, but to ensure no one controls me. And it is the rarest thing in the world. This is sovereign morality, because it cannot be mass-produced. It cannot be taught in institutions. It cannot be rewarded by a system that depends on your compliance. It can only be found in silence, in reflection, in the long dark hours where you ask yourself, what do I truly believe when no one is watching? What am I willing to protect, even if it costs me everything? Who am I beneath the masks? And if you stay in that question long enough, a new kind of clarity begins to emerge. Not the clarity of the rule follower, not the clarity of the rebel, not cruelty, not ruthlessness, but lucidity, but the clarity of someone who has seen the trap from both sides and walked away. This is what Machiavelli saw in the prince. The ability to look the world in the eye, not as a child, not as a slave, not as a saint, but as a sovereign being. And that's who you are becoming. Not good, not evil, free. And now the final question is not rhetorical. It's yours to answer. Will you continue performing someone else's virtue? Or will you risk becoming whole? Because to live as a good person in a broken world is easy. But to live as a sovereign soul awake, clear, untamed, that's where the real revolution begins. And it begins here, right now. When you finally stop asking, am I good enough? And start asking, am I still mine?